another session of our playlist, and this time we'll be discussing a very important topic called React props. So from this point onwards, we'll be switching to the next level that we'll be having on with regards to these concepts that we are learning. So React props will open up new, let's say, unexplored section of this coding that we are doing, and it will surely help us turn this particular coding of ours, this particular experience of ours, much more dynamic and much more realistic, which means these concepts are very much useful whenever we are dealing with real life scenarios, whenever we want to include something that has to do much with what is expected in like live websites, in whatever we are supposed to, the functionalities and all that we are supposed to integrate or include in the live projects or the live websites that we make. So let's see what this is. Okay, so this will be our starting sandbox. Let me guide you through a little changes that I made in this. So as you can see, this is that similar to the older sandbox that we had, in which we had these one unordered list in which we had, okay, let me open another window for this. So we had 3 photos here instead of only the text that we had. So it consists of one h2, which is the name of this picture of the superhero, and then we have one email ID. Okay, so these are the fake email IDs that we've got for all 3 of them, and then we have one image. So as you saw in the previous session in which we were dealing with all these images and all, so there was one issue regarding the length of that image address that we used. So as a workaround, what I did is I created another file called image address image add.javascript, and there I created 3 constants. One will be pat, one will be drd, and the third one is called wolv, like this. And in these 3 constants, I've saved the image addresses of these 3 images, and then I have exported them. Then back in index.js, we've imported them like this. Always remember, we have to maintain the same order in which we are exporting. We have to import them in the same order. And then by using these like JavaScript here, I am again using that particular URL right here. So this way you can see the code of ours is looking much more cleaner and much more readable, because if we pasted that link here and we saved it, so that will be something like this, and we'd be scrolling for eternity. So there's that, and there's not much new anything apart from that. So what we intend to basically make here is, this is some sort of let's say contact cards or a visiting card of these people. So this consists some basic information of them, which means a name, and then we have a photo of them, and then we have an email ID of them. So these 3 we have as our starting code. So before we dive into what the React props are, let's have a little bit of a plot setting for that. So if you head over to this index.html file, always remember, you can also write or add plain HTML elements. Apart from writing React code that we do in our index.js, we can also write plain HTML here. After this, a div with the ID of root that we've declared, that which we use to point to while writing our React code. We can also include basic HTML elements. So in order to demonstrate you some feature of this, let's head over to here. So right now from index.js, I've commented out the remaining stuff and only this heading is visible. So let's say in index.html, if we were to add an input tag, so this is a self-closing tag, you can see an input box appears right here. Now you see that in HTML you have these attributes, right? Which means we can have an ID of this input, let's say name, and then we can also have a placeholder text, which means when if nothing is there, let's say we write here enter your name like this. And what else can we have here? Let's say we have a value here, so I'm gonna write my name here. So what this means is we have an input box right here. The ID of this input box will be name, and it will be having a pre-filled value of my name here. If I remove this, you'll be able to see the placeholder text appearing right here, and the ID of this input will be name. So if we head over to the inspect section of this page of ours and we go to console, you'll be able to work on this particular input. You'll be able to, let's say, interact with this using some basic coding. Let's say what we do is let me expand it a bit. So let's say if we get hold of this one, so we hit document dot get element by ID, and we know the ID of our element is name. So if we mention name here, so you can see we have this particular element being popped right there. So what we can do is we can save this particular element of ours inside a variable. Let's call our variable temp, and if we hit this, so now you'll be seeing that the temp that we have will be pointing or will be consisting of this particular element. And now if I want to tap into any one of the attribute of this particular element of ours, let's say I want to tap into the placeholder property of this, I can just append dot placeholder here, and if I hit enter, you can see that placeholder text is enter your name. Similarly, if I want to get hold of the value that I have right now, so right now you can see there's no value here, but if I write something, let's say I'm gonna write Bruce Wayne here, and then if I get over here and I hit enter after typing the after tapping into the value attribute of this element of ours, you can see I get Bruce Wayne or whatever it was there. So if I remove this Wayne from here and if I again try to get it, so you can see that it is actually getting hold of this particular element, and I can let's say access the attributes or the properties that I have bundled along with this element. So you can see that this is a way to pass custom information via these attributes to our HTML element, like the way we mentioned the placeholder text. So what we are doing is we are basically injecting this in our input element here, and when we mention this value of my name here, then if you basically refresh it, so this particular value will be pre-filled in this input box of ours. So what I want to show you right here is that these attributes that we have for this HTML element, these are the predefined elements, which means that if I write something like let's say voodoo, and let's say if I make this equals to something, so it is not going to recognize what this is, all right, because HTML have its already defined properties or these attributes, and you have to work accordingly. So the usage or the customization that I can make with this particular HTML element, or the interaction, or let's say the ability to pass these custom informations via these attributes to our HTML element, is a bit limited in the case of HTML. But if we try to talk about React, this is where React properties come in. Okay, so we have a similar functionality in React called React properties, which is popularly known as React props. So getting back to Okay, the initial point from where we started. Okay, why am I not able to comment this out? Yeah, that's good. So what React props stands for, let me show you with an example. So there's one problem with this particular web page of ours, if you notice. And the problem is that we can see that whatever information we have right here, whatever let's say components we have in this particular site of ours, they are pretty repetitive, right? Which means they have one heading, they have one picture, they have one email. But if you see right here, we are writing it again and again. Like we are explicitly mentioning h2 and writing hard coding whatever text is in here. Same with the second one, same with the third one. Same goes for the image and same goes for the email IDs, which is not a good coding practice. So when you are coding, what we ought to do is we always try to reduce these trivial things and all the repetitive stuff. We try to automate it or we try to make it more dynamic. So if let's say what we do is we remove these two like this, and let's get rid of this input box as well. So right now we only got one picture of us, which is our favorite Batman. So what we'll do is we'll create a simple card function right here, and I'm creating it inside index.js only, just because we are looking at the demonstration purpose right here. Later we can move it out as another file of card.jsx or whatever you want to name it. So if we return here, let's say this, whatever we are returning here, if we take this like this, if I cut it out and create a div like this, and in between these, if I paste it like this, and in here I just mention this component. So what I did was basically just I extracted whatever the card details I had in here, and I created a function out of them. Now, as we saw in the case of the input box, in the case of HTML, in React, what you can do is you can create your own attributes or your own properties with names, whatever you want to give them, and you can pass them back to your function via props. So what I can do here is, instead of giving this particular h1, okay, so this h1, let's not make it a part of this, let's paste it here. Yeah, so h1 is not repetitive. Starting from h2, you can see that we are hard coding all of this. So what React props does is it enables us to create these custom attributes of ours. What I mean by this is, let's say I create a name property and I cut this and paste it like this. So now what I'm basically doing is I'm having this custom card component, and I'm saying that it consists of one attribute called name, and which is equals to this. Similarly, I can do the same with email, and let's say I take this, cut this from here, paste it like this, and the same with the image source. Let's cut it and call this img and paste it like this. So if you see, then we have to write props right here in order to specify that this card function of ours will be taking some inputs wherever the card custom component is being used. And what is this props right here? it is basically an object. So um, what you can let's say remember from this is that this props will be sort of an object consisting of the key value pairs of whatever attributes you are using right here. For example, the key of name will consist of the value of Batman. The image here, so okay, so when we say the img attribute right here, so you might be seeing that why should I write this like this little text right here and store it inside another attribute instead of just writing it like this. So remember, we have already we already did some workaround for this image URL of ours, and if you scroll over it, you can see this bat constant. This is not just a 3-letter word, it's actually a big string which we have just created a workaround of. So basically why we are doing this is in order to make our code cleaner and in order to make this much more reusable. So in here, what we can then do is we can tap into the name property of these props. But remember, since we are writing JavaScript, we ought to wrap them in these curly braces. Same goes with src. We'll write props dot img in here, and same goes for the email one. So if I write props dot email, and now you can see, okay, props dot email, wrap them in these curly braces, and now you can see this whatever this card of ours, let's say all these three stuff consists of a card. So this particular card component of ours is again back to its initial form, but now the function that we have created, this card component that we have created, it does not consist of anything predefined or anything hard-coded. It's completely dynamic now, and whatever value we have right here, it is picking up from these props. So what are props? Props are React properties through which you can talk to your own component. You can pass values inside your component. You can pass values via attributes inside your component, and then you can tap into those particular attributes. You can tap into that particular information by the usage of this dot operator. So treating this props as an object and treating these attributes as key value pairs, you can just tap into whatever you mentioned right here. So it need not be name or img, you can make it whatever. So the limitation that we saw in the case of that HTML element, that these attributes were predefined and we were forced to use them, like we cannot write id, like identity instead of id, or place instead of placeholder. But in the case of React props, you can obviously do that, and you can write n number of attributes like this. So once we did this, what is the usage of this is, initially the way we were creating these three cards of ours, the number one was Batman and the Daredevil and the Wolverine one, we were hard coding whatever we were writing in here. But let's say if we copy this and paste it 2 times over, so now instead of modifying all the let's say information or rewriting the h2, the img, the paragraph tag, and then explicitly writing these emails, so let's say right now we are talking about 3 of such cards. What if they were 100 or 300? So it will not be very much feasible to rewrite all these stuff. So what we can do instead is like just modify whatever we want to change. In the case of our web page, we'll just modify the attributes that we are passing for this card component. So in here, instead of that, if we mention drd, and in the case of email, let's say I write @health.com, and in the case of Wolverine, I think I wrote something like this, and let's change the name of this and the image. URL. So it was will be, you can cross check it with the 3 ones that we've imported at the top. And if you forgot to use any one of these inside your code, a yellow line will appear below them. So if you see inside this popped out window, you can see the initial let's say mode that we had, the initial way the website looked, that is looking exactly the same. And now our code is changed a lot. So instead of having all of that rewritten right here, instead of redundantly rewriting code and hard coding the whatever information was out there, we created a dynamic cart function or a cart component, and we are populating it using dynamic data. So this was one of the key concepts. This was one of the key, let's say, flagship functionality of React that we talked about in the beginning. Why we prefer to use React? Because one of the core functionality of it is reusability, and that's how we can do this, by the usage of React props. Now, one more thing that we can see in here is, let's say if you head over to this one, and let's remove all of these stylings, and if I create another class called custom style, so let's write it CST style, and if I say that the color is supposed to be red, so if you get over to index.js right here and you try to, let's say, include this class right here like this, and we say that CST hyphen style. If we do this and if we try to refresh our page, okay, in here we want this to be red, and in index.js what we did was we included a class name of this inside our div, and if we try to refresh this, yeah, so now you can see that all of these, the whatever text we had in whether in the case of h2 or the paragraph one, for all these 3 cards the text changed to red. But what if I cut it from here and I try to paste it like this, and no matter how many times if I try to refresh it right now, the styling that we are hoping to achieve, that we are hoping to be applied on these cards, it won't work. Why is it so? Because if you try to include your classes, your CSS classes, or you want to write some inline styling, when you are declaring this, wherever you are writing this custom component of yours, wherever you are using it, it will not work, because this particular attribute will be treated as something similar to these ones. All right. So React will not recognize that you are indeed hoping to integrate this class name with the name of CST-style. It does not recognize that you want to integrate this CSS styling. Instead, it thinks that, okay, this is another attribute which might be used via this props right here. Okay. So this is the answer to one of the previous sessions in which I told you that whenever you want to include any class, any CSS styling into your components, always include them in the HTML element wherever you are declaring them. I mean, wherever you are writing these HTML elements, and not try to include these CSS stylings at the place where you are mentioning your custom React component. And the reason for that is because then it will not be identified as a CSS class or a CSS styling. It will be identified as yet another attribute. So this is one thing to remember. And by this, you can see that we have achieved that dynamic nature of this particular card component. We have transferred this website, we have transformed this website from being a purely hard-coded, repetitive stuff 3 times over, to creating one, let's say, template of ours and then populating it via these attributes we have. So we can create n number of these cards, and just by mentioning or changing these 3 attributes, we can create whatever number of cards we want, and all of them will be different and unique. So next thing that I want you to do is have a little hands-on experience with these concepts. So let's get into it. All right, so in this we have another challenge for us. In here you can see that we have this weird looking card with us. In here we see that we have this card with us, this weird looking one, and what we hope to achieve is, first of all, making those 3 cards of ours, that 3 list that some of you might be fed up with, and we have to change the looks and let's say the styling of this card accordingly. So in the starting sandbox that you have, you will be having this styles.css already populated with some styling, and as we did in one of our previous practice sessions, you have to, let's say, work around and do some hit and trial with this styles.css of yours, and you have to see that how you are supposed to use these stylings into these elements that we have, which styling will go to which one, and apply them accordingly in order to make them, first of all, look like this. So if you see, the number 1 task that we have is to apply CSS styles to match the appearance that we have on the completed app, and I've provided a link for the completed application that would look something like this. The second thing that we are required to do is to create a contact card component, which is to be used reusably, as we've just seen right now in the previous one. So in the previous case of ours, we created that contact card inside this index.js file only, but now you're supposed to create a separate file of it, and using the import and export keywords, let's say, integrated inside your project. The third one will be the usage of props to render the default Batman contact card, so the card component can be reused for others too. So basically, since we'll be creating the contact card and we'll be creating a dynamic, so with the usage of props, we'll be populating it with whatever data we want. So in this case, I've added one more data that will be the phone number of these. So it is basically just some fake phone numbers and email IDs, just so that they look pretty complete. And the last one is that you will be seeing one not context.js but info.js. You'll be seeing one file called info.js, and in this you'll be having this constant of info, which is an array, and you'll be having an array of objects. Okay, and the first object will consist of the details of this Batman, the image URL that we have, a phone and email. And what you can try doing is, instead of even writing what we were basically writing and like mentioning that name equals to this and email equals to this, image URL equals to this, while we were mentioning the attributes of these and passing them via props to our card component or the card function that we created, try using this array here, right here, the info array from info.js, and try populating your cards via this info array. So the fourth one will be a little difficult if you haven't attempted it before, but up till here, I'm sure you will be able to achieve this. So pause this now and give it a try yourself. All right, so how was it? Were you able to do it or not? Anyways, we'll be following and solving this particular task of ours in the given order. If you were stuck or if you need any sort of reference, just follow along. So the number one part we have is to apply the CSS styles to our app.jsx component. So if we get over there inside app.jsx, and we see that our favorite superhero this. So the first thing that we see here is that the name of this card that we have, the name that we have on this card, the font and the color looks a little bit different from the one that we have. Let's pop this one as well. There's a difference between them. Let's dig around inside our styles.css and let's see which class might be useful to us in this case. So we can see all of these ones, they might already applied, and we are talking about the text right here. So dot heading dot card, and we can see that in the name one we have this color and the font size is changed. So if we try including this name class of ours inside the h2, it might work because it has the changed font size, it has the mentioned margins as we can see in the completed section. So if we try including it inside here, like class name equals to name, and now we can see that the name is modified accordingly. So the classes that we have in styles.css is also named accordingly with the usage of it. So the next difference that we can see is the picture that we have right here. So it is pretty much a little stretched and all, and the final outcome that we want is the picture in here is circular and with this white border. So let's see in styles.css what we can see. So there is one .card img, but this will automatically be applied since we have an img tag. But if we look at this particular class, this .circle.-img, you can see that we have a border radius, which we can see that we have a border in here, and then we have this solid white colored one with some width and some height. So let's try to include this class inside our image tag. In order to do it, we have to write class name equals to circle-img, and on doing this we can see that our image has transformed similar to the one in the completed version. The final thing that is left to modify are these two details, the phone number and the email. So we have they have a little bit change in their color right here. So again, getting to the styles.css, and if you see this particular class right here, I think this will do job because it has some margins which will make it look much better and some color associated with it. So if we get over to the para tags, and in order to have multiple cursors, you can press alt and click at the n number of regions you want to type at, and here we can write class name that was info, and now you can see that at least one card of ours now looks very much similar to the final results that we hope to achieve. So the number one task that we had of applying the CSS styling to our app.js component is now complete. The second one says that we have to create a content card component to be used reusably. So basically what this wants to say is we need to extract whatever we've written right here and create a card component. So let's create it. We'll call it card.jsx, and then doing the prerequisite of importing React in order to make it the code work. Like this, we can create a function. Oops. func, and we'll call it card. Like this, and then you can head over to app.jsx and just take out all of this right up till okay. So this div is being crossed by this div. We can take this all out, cut it out, and write return here, and just paste it like this. Finally, export this as a default, and then we can import it inside our inside our app.jsx, and then write card like this. And you will see it appears similarly the way it did before. Okay, so the second step was create a card component to be reusable as seen in previous session. Now the third part, and they are basically a little interlinked if you see it. We have to use props to render the default Batman card of ours. So in order to use that, we have to make this particular card of ours dynamic. So let's write, okay, not pops, props right here. And first we'll take this name from here. Let's cut it and write it like this. Okay, I think I am missing one quotation. And then here we can tap into the name property of props. Oops, always remember to wrap this inside these curly braces in order to make your JavaScript code work. The next thing that we have is the image. Okay, and we have this src. So this time I'm just cutting it out raw, and img will be equals to this. Okay, I think by mistake we now have two quotations in the starting. Let's remove one of them like this. Okay, so in the source one we can write props.img like this, and now the image is back. And in the case of phone number, let's cut this out, head over to app.jsx, call this one phone, paste it like this, and create a one called email, and similarly just cutting this out like this and filling these with props.phone as mentioned in the attribute, and props.email, and finally writing the email like this. And now you can see the card component that we have right here. It is now a purely dynamic one. We don't have anything that is hard coded. The name is coming from props, the image URL is coming from props, the phone and the email is coming from props, and the whatever styling has been applied to every individual card that will be created using this template of ours. So this step is done, and using props to render the default Batman card, we can be reused for others as well. Okay, so up till here, if you were able to achieve the required tasks up till this point, then congrats. You are you are in resonance with whatever we are learning up till now and whatever we have learned up till now, especially regarding whatever React props and the component creation. So give a pat yourself on the back and move towards the final one. And in this case, we are saying that let's try importing the info.js file and create these card components. In here now, let's talk about what this info.js file is. So we can see that we have one constant info, and this info is an array which consists of these three objects, and every object of ours consists of data related to, let's say, respective card component of ours, because the first one is Batman. In the final result that we hope to achieve, the second one will be Daredevil. Let me scroll like this. Yeah, you can see. And the third one will be Wolverine. You can see right here. So let's say if we export this info like as a default, and we head over to our app.jsx, and let's get the cursor back, and then we import this info from dot in order to move one folder like one level backwards, because this info is located one folder out of this app.jsx, first to components and then to the src level and then to info.js. So like this. And then we have another custom card component of ours, and then here, instead of having name hard coded as Batman, what we can do is, you can see that if we go to the very top, this info is an array. All right, and whenever we are talking about arrays, we know that the elements that we have, these are in the form of indexes. All right, so let me try doing one thing, and that will be, let's comment this out, and if I try to console log this info, and if we see this console, you can see that this is basically an object. All right, this is an array of 3 objects, and since it is an array, so these 3 objects are corresponding to these 3 indexes. And always remember, the first index of arrays start with 0. So in the first place, at the index 0, we have one object which consists the relevant information of Batman. The second one, which is at index 1, consists the relevant information of the next one, and the third one at the index 2 consists of the information regarding to Wolverine. So that means is, if we tap into the 0th index of this array, then we'll be able to tap into the object that consists of the information related to our first card, which is Batman. So what we can do is, let's comment this out and uncomment this one. Since we are using this, importing this from here and writing JavaScript code, let's say I get into the 0th index, and we know that the 0th index was for Batman, right? Okay, I have commented this. Again, write this. Okay, hold on, something is really wrong. Okay, let's just complete this first. So since we know that in here at the 0th index, the first object consists of the relevant information of Batman. So when we write info 0 like this, and we apply the dot operator, that means we are finally into an object of Batman, and then we are tapping into the name property of it. And if you look inside it, the name property, the name attribute consists of Batman. So let's complete the remaining ones. The first one will be obviously name. The next one, which is the image one, we know that in info 0, which is the case of Batman, the image URL will be stored inside this image URL. Okay, img URL. Let me type it out exactly the same like this. The next one, at the next attribute that we want is phone. All right, so the phone is written here. Let me just scroll to the very bottom as phone, simply like this, and email is email. So phone will be equals to info 0 dot phone, and email will be equals to info0 dot email. And since this above one is taking too much of the space, let's remove this. And then if I hit refresh now, you'll be able to see that the card that we were having initially, it is still appearing right here. So what we basically did was we imported this array from info.js into our app.jsx, and since this was an array of objects, we knew that at the first location we had all the information related to Batman, and if we try to copy and paste it like this, we know that at the 0th index we had all the information related to Batman, and at the first index all the information related to Daredevil, which is the second card of ours. So if I just switch the index from 0 to 1 like this, and in the case of Wolverine, we just have to switch the index from 0 to 2 like this. And then if you hit refresh, you'll be able to see that now the final result is exactly the same with whatever we have right now. So in this, you can see that now on hitting save, it is properly formatted now. So previously, the attributes that we were filling out by hard coding them, even though they were much more better than the very first version in which every information of this was just explicitly written, even the h2 and the email and the image URLs, we first turned them into a dynamic template or a dynamic component. We populated the data with the usage of React props by mentioning all these information as attributes of this component. And then we went one step further and we let's say stored all the relevant information inside one file, inside one array, objects of all these relevant cards inside one array, and then we used it to populate the data similarly. Now you can see that some of you might still be able to see some redundancy in this, and you are absolutely correct. The redundancy is we are still writing all of this like info0 and then 1 and then 2. So if you look closely, all of these three are also like let's say redundant or very much repetitive. But don't worry about that. We'll further deal with this using map, filter and reduce, and we'll be studying it. And then we'll just after we have had studied it, after we have learned it, then we'll just be able to do or achieve this task by just writing only one part of this, and we'll be able to change or switch this 0 to 1 to 2 and up till n number of cases by the usage of some logic with us. So since right now we only had 3 cards with us, so it was not very much painful to write them out. But let's say what if they were 100 or 300 of them? So we'll have another learning, we'll have to use another functionality for that purpose. Okay, so let's move towards the end of this. So how was it? Were you able to solve this? Were you able to learn what these React props are, how we are supposed to use them, and what all let's say freedom of writing the code, what all flexibility, what all dynamic nature it brings along with us? So it was a little lengthy topic consisting the size of other sessions in this playlist, but I wanted to keep it inside one container only, because if you had some gap between the learning and the practice of this, you might slip something, some important concept or some important let's say tool that we ought to use in this. So I hope you were able to achieve the task. If you were not, same, clean slate, retry, watch the video. If you have any suggestion for us, mistake that you think you might like to point out, or any optimization that you might have used in your code, feel free to share it with the community, with me, down in the comment section. And that will be all from my side for this section. I'll see you in the next one.